Joining me now is Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Senator Sanders, welcome back to the Young Turks and our inaugural segment of the conversation.
Great to be with you, Cenk.
All right, great to have you. All right, let's talk policy. Let's do it right away. So
I tell you what I want to do before we talk policy. Let me congratulate you guys. I understand now this is your 17th anniversary. Is that correct?
That is right.
Let me say a word on that. And I applaud you and other alternative media for the extraordinary job you have done in forcing discussion on issue after issue that the mainstream media either ignores or de-emphasizes. My criticism of mainstream media is not Donald Trump's. Mainstream media is not an enemy of the people. It is not fake news. The major problem is that what they choose to focus on is often not the most important issues facing the working families of this country, not the most important issues facing our nation and the world. And you guys do a really good job in that area, and I applaud you and thank you very much for what you're doing.
I really appreciate that, Senator Sanders. And we're now 17 years old and the oldest show on the internet, so we're getting some critique for being too old. So there's a lot we share in common.
So am I, as a matter of fact. I get that critique as well.
So actually, I want to get into Medicare in 1 second, but now you brought up the media, and I'll talk about the media in the context of Medicare as well. But they had a town hall for Howard Schultz on CNN the other day, and when asked about policy positions over and over again, he didn't seem to have any. And I just trying to figure out why Howard Schultz got a town hall. Normally, independent candidates don't get very much coverage. They weren't lavishing attention on a lot of the independent candidates in 2016, for example. He doesn't seem to have any policy positions or any popularity at all. Why do you think that CNN went out of their way to give him such a giant ad in essence, especially when they wouldn't cover your town halls on policy issues?
Well, I think the answer is not hard to understand. Like former Mayor Bloomberg, who also has no grassroots support, they are billionaires. And in the world we are living in, any billionaire, no matter how little or much he or she may know, becomes a credible candidate because they can pour hundreds of millions of dollars to get themselves elected. So to answer your question simply and straightforwardly, he gets attention because he's a billionaire, even though he may not know much about policy. And people who are out there, serious people, young people, working people who have great ideas, who have a life of struggle, will get zero attention because they're not credible candidates because they don't have a whole lot of money.
That's unfortunately seems to be the case quite often in the media. So let's talk about Medicare for all. Now, some are saying that Medicare buy-in is the same thing as Medicare for all. That if they're for that proposal, that means that check, I'm covered. It's the same thing as Medicare for all, and it appears that a lot of the media is going along with that. Is that true?
No, of course it is not the same. It is fundamentally different. Medicare buy-in will impact a few 100,000 people. Those people have the money to buy in. It is similar to the concept of public option. That is, if you're not happy with your private insurance, you can buy in to Medicare. When we talk about Medicare for all, we're talking about two fundamental principles. Number one, the need for the United States to join every other major country on earth and guarantee healthcare to all, A-L-L, all people as a right. Second of all, we understand that the current system, because of its dominance by the insurance companies and the drug companies, is enormously wasteful and dysfunctional. And if we are going to have a cost-effective, universal healthcare system, the only way to do that is through a Medicare for all single-payer system. So buy-in is an incremental program that will help some, not a whole lot of people we suspect. Medicare for all basically says that the function of healthcare in America should be provide healthcare to all people as a right in a cost-effective way. And also, when we do that, we'll be able to substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs in this country because we'll be able to negotiate prices with the drug companies.
So it seems like there's a number of issues there, but it seems like you're focusing in on the fact that Medicare buy-in would still keep private insurance and their costs around, and so that if you went to that system, you would not save nearly as much money as Medicare for all. Am I hearing that right?
No, you're hearing it exactly right. The system remains intact. You give a certain number of people, we don't know exactly how many, I don't suspect it's a whole lot, the opportunity to get, in this case, a public insurance program called Medicare. But Cenk, what we have got to look at when we talk about healthcare is ask a simple question. How does it happen that in the United States, we end up spending almost twice as much per capita on healthcare as do the people of any other major country? And the answer is the function of our healthcare system today is not to provide quality care in a cost-effective manner to everyone. It is to make as much profit as possible for the insurance companies and the drug companies. And unless we deal with that issue, we're not going to lower the cost of healthcare in this country, and we're not going to cover everyone as a right.
So that brings us back to the media, because it seems to me that your main opponent is not any other candidate, because a lot of them are saying they're for Medicare for all. Now, whether they actually are is a different question, because now they're fudging a little bit and saying Medicare buy-in is the same thing, which, as you just clarified, is not. It doesn't seem that the American people are an issue, because over 70% of them agree with you. But the media keeps saying that Medicare for all costs more money. They keep citing a Koch study without citing the savings. And now they've even stopped saying that it's a Koch study. They just state it as a fact. And they keep saying it's a fringe idea when it has 70% popularity. So what is going on here? Why is the media keep putting out things there that are, at a bare minimum, incredibly biased against this policy proposal?
Look, Cenk, when I began the program by congratulating you and other alternative media for the important work you're doing, take a look, and I'm going to answer your question in a second, but take a broad look at how the corporate media has functioned in recent years. In terms of the worst foreign policy disaster in the modern history of this country, which was the war in Iraq, if you check it out, virtually all, almost all, not all, McClatchy, for example, played a great role. Almost all of the major media told us it was a great idea, it was a good idea to go to war. When you talk about the major economic crisis facing America today, and that is the movement toward oligarchy and the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, such that 3 people now own more wealth than the bottom half of America, the corporate media certainly was not there. When you talk about the great planetary crisis that we're facing today, and that is climate change, the corporate media, by and large, with some exceptions, was not there as well. So what you have is a corporate media whose function is to make as much money as they possibly can. That does not mean to say there aren't great writers, that day after day there aren't very good articles. You know, there are. But by and large, you have a media which is owned by very wealthy folks who are trying to make as much money as they can. They are not dealing with the issues that are most important to the needs of working families. Give you an example. Just yesterday, we had a really good press conference with a number of senators and a House member talking about the need to expand Social Security benefits, because a lot of seniors in this country are not making it on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security, and extend the life of Social Security for 50 years by doing away with the cap, which is now at $132,900, almost no coverage at all on an issue that impacts tens of millions of people. So bottom line is, I think the critique of the corporate media is not that it's fake news, not that they're enemies of the people. Those are outrageous and ugly statements by Trump. But it is time and time again, they ignored the real issues impacting working people. People working longer hours for lower wages, people living in poverty, young people unable to get the education they need, or they're coming out of school deeply in debt. So that is, in my view, the critique of the corporate media. Now, in terms of healthcare, how many people in this country do you think, Cenk, and I don't know the answer to this, I'd like to hear your opinion on it, even know that the United States of America is the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people? How many people know that 50 miles away from where I live in Canada, you walk into the hospital, you have cancer, you need extensive therapy and treatment, it is $0. How many people in America even know that? Do we think that the corporate media has told the American people about the healthcare programs that are going on around the rest of the world, that we spend so much more per capita on healthcare than other nations? The answer is no. And that is, that's what the establishment is about, is protecting and preserving the status quo in healthcare, in income and wealth inequality, on climate change, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, one more thing on that. You're right. Almost every time the media talks about it, whether it's cable news or even esteemed print journalists in the New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, they frame it as, how can we afford Medicare for all? And look at all the cost of Medicare for all. But they never give the context of, in reality, how can we afford the current system, which is twice as expensive as all other developed countries average, including Canada. And so I then turn back to you and ask this. When the right wing criticizes the media appears to be deathly afraid of them and bend over backwards to help them. And so they'll aid and abet oftentimes statements that are outrageously false. For example, the Green New Deal would ban airplanes. It does no such thing. That's a total ridiculous fabrication. But the media will report it as he said, she said, that's what they say. And oftentimes won't even give the other side. Why? Because they're deathly afraid of the right wing and being called biased. But when progressives say, wait a minute, why won't you give the context on Medicare for all and the costs, et cetera? There seems to be an absolute sound of silence. Why the great disparity in how they treat two different sides?
Look, when you talk about Medicare for all, we are talking about radical transformation of almost 20% of the GDP in this country. Right now, you have insurance companies, drug companies that make incredible profits every single year. CEOs make excessive compensation packages. And the media chooses not to take on the special interest of this country, whether it's healthcare or anything else. And in terms of Medicare for all, Cenk, what they continue to talk about is how taxes are going to go up. What they forget to tell the American people is you're not going to be paying any private health insurance premiums, no deductibles, no co-payments. And by the way, we are going to expand Medicare benefits for senior citizens by including dental care, by including eyeglasses and hearing aids. Somehow or another, that gets very little coverage.
Yep.
But bottom line is, the corporate media is not particularly interested in taking on the corporate establishment in healthcare or in any other sector of our economy.
Well, that unfortunately makes sense from their perspective. So now they are paying a little bit more attention to some new people that have come to Congress: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, almost all Justice Democrats. So when you see AOC fighting for the issues you care about and fighting for Green New Deal, which you've advocated for pretty much your whole career, when you see Ro Khanna helping you on the issue of the Amazon wages and Walmart wages in Yemen, et cetera, do you feel like to some degree with the Just Democrats, your cavalry has arrived?
Beginning to arrive. We still have a long way to go, but there is, look, Cenk, the most important, I think, political development of recent years is, number one, as a result of what you guys do, what my 2016 campaign is about, what Alexandria and Ro and Pramila and others are doing, is we are significantly changing the conversation. And the American people are now beginning to say, yeah, why should we be the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all? How come we are not addressing the great planetary crisis of climate change? Is it morally right that 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people? And as we have new and bold progressive leadership coming into the Congress, those ideas are going to be discussed more and more. The American people are going to hear that more and more despite media opposition. And the end result of that is, I think we have gone a long way to transforming how the American people think about ideas that just a few years ago were seemingly radical or extreme but today have become mainstream. If we were talking 5 years ago, Cenk, and maybe we did on this show, about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you would not have dreamed that a majority of the American people now believe it, that community after community, state after state is passing that legislation. So yeah. Criminal justice, the same thing. We are making progress in a number of areas. We're seeing a grassroots movement beginning to demand that we have a government that addresses the needs of working families and not just worries about tax breaks for the super rich.
So that leads me to the last question. The New York Times, in discussing your potential run for president, said he is something of a victim of his own success. The senator's views on issues like universal health care and his willingness to shun corporate contributions have increasingly become not only part of the Democratic mainstream, but also litmus tests within the party. But yet none of those are policies right now. None of them have passed. So do you feel like your job is done and you could pass the baton, or is there a lot more work left to do?
Oh, there's an enormous amount of work to do. Good news, as I just said, is the ideas that a few years ago seemed radical and extreme are now mainstream and supported by the majority of the American people. The other very good news, and we see that in the complexion of the freshman class in the Congress, is that more and more young people, people of color, women, are getting involved in the political process. So the political revolution that I have fought for years, two parts. A progressive agenda, we're succeeding there. But equally important is the need to create a strong grassroots movement of millions of people who are prepared to stand up to the insurance companies and the drug companies and the fossil fuel industry and Wall Street and the billionaire class in general, who today have such incredible power over our economic and political lives. We're making progress there, and I think you're seeing that in the freshman class, but clearly, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, that was my favorite critique of you, that you've won so much that you're not needed anymore.
Yeah, and that's why we have Medicare for all. We have a fair distribution of wealth and income. We have solved the climate change crisis. I didn't know that. I guess I missed that. But I kind of think we have a little bit of work remaining in front of us.
All right, Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Cenk, keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.